Hey there, my name's Sean Esbjörn-Hargens, and I'm the founder of MetaIntegral, which is a global transdisciplinary design firm. And one of the things we love to design is wisdom economies. And so I want to take this time for the next hour or so and share with you the MetaImpact framework that we've developed in order to support our design work in the context of multi-capital value assessment systems for organizations and leaders. So let me share with you my screen so we can go through some slides. Right. All right, there we go. So hopefully you can see the slide, and you can also see me talking to you. So in our conversation today, in my presentation, I want to focus on these four topics. Business as usual is changing. Then I want to talk about multi-capital models and the different approaches that I've come across out there. Then I want to walk you through the MetaImpact framework, give you a sense of the key elements and distinctions that are part of this model. And then we'll kind of double click on that and go deeper into the 10 capitals. All of this is to help us understand how you can design wisdom economies in your own context, your projects, organizations. So let me just say a little bit about MetaIntegral for those of you who are not familiar with MetaIntegral. So we're committed to supporting pioneers of integration to be impact. So we like to transform people through our academy by training leaders. Through our associates, we work with companies and organizations. And then through MetaIntegral Capital, we're developing integrated reporting and software platforms that are transformative for the users. So actually growing and transforming their consciousness as a result of interfacing with the software, and that are also integrative in nature. There's this great quote by Charles Eisenstein that I always find inspiration with, and it's that the more beautiful world our heart knows is possible, right? So we sense that there's a better way of doing things than how we're currently doing it. And in many cases, you're actively involved with helping to build and make possible this world that we sense is wanting to be birthed by so many of us. So that's very much the spirit in which I am sharing with you today. And I feel that the MetaImpact framework can contribute to helping to create the more beautiful world that our heart knows is possible. Another quote from John Fullerton, founder and CEO of Capital Institute. We can and must bring our economic theory and practice into alignment with our latest understanding of how the universe and our humanity work. I feel this is so true, and it's very much the reason why I've created the MetaImpact framework, and I'm sharing it with you today, because I feel that this model does a really good job of aligning our approach to economies and value assessment, value creation, with how we understand nature works and the universe in general, as well as just what it means to be human and to be in communities and in relationship with each other. It feels like we need to have the economic systems that we're working within actually match the complexity and dynamism of the universe, which includes us as human beings in the natural world. So kind of in summary from that, then we need an economy that is open, inclusive, regenerative, green, circular, transparent, integrative, and multi-capitalist. Multi-capitalist meaning working with multiple forms of capital, multiple types of value. So currently our economic system is anything but these adjectives, right? It's not very open. It's not very integrative. It's reductionistic. It's not very regenerative. It's extractive. It's not very green or sustainable, and so forth. So we use the phrase wisdom economy as a way of kind of encapsulating all of these key words. So business as usual is changing. There's a lot of amazing things that are happening that have been building momentum over the last 5-10 years, and even since the 60s and 70s. So just to name a few of them, just to kind of give us a sense of the zeitgeist that we're operating within currently. Conscious capitalism is on the rise. There's chapters all around the world of business owners and leaders working together to do business with heart and awareness. Social impact investing has really become really important and a big thing. And most recently, BlackRock sent out a letter saying they weren't going to invest in any organization that didn't place social contributions kind of at the center of what they're doing. And how this is the world's largest asset manager. It's like, this is like pretty amazing news, right? Because they manage almost $6 trillion in assets. And they're telling everyone that, they're not going to invest in companies unless those companies have a social impact strategy and can demonstrate their social impact. So this is a game changer. And this is just one example of many of how, people and organizations are taking leadership and helping to change business as usual. We see the B Corps and for-benefit companies and different types of organizations that are breaking out of the nonprofit, for-profit dichotomy, finding kind of new organizational structures. We have alternative currencies, such as cryptocurrencies and other types of non-financial forms of currency that are becoming more and more popular. Reputation currencies on social media is one example. The reviews on Amazon as another illustration of kind of currency. There's integrated accounting and reporting that's starting to become embraced by more and more companies. So the IIRC, or the International Integrated Reporting Council, I think it was back in 2013, worked with stakeholders from around the world and lots of different sectors and companies. And for several years, did a process of stakeholder engagement where they developed an integrated reporting process that includes 6 types of capital, which we'll go over soon. And then there's also other more current efforts such as Reporting 3.0 that's really exciting. We are actually, MetaIntegral is an advocacy partner with Reporting 3.0. And as we'll get into a little bit later, we're in the process of developing the MetaImpact framework in a way that includes and takes into account the context and thresholds for capacity of the capitals. So this is just an example of how we're wanting to make a meta move and connect with other people out there who are doing similar kinds of work, and then incorporate best practices that they've identified into what we're doing. There's also just the new economy movement in general, and a lot that's happening in that space. There's the Reinventing Organizations movement, or TEAL movement, Frederic Lalux's work. The sharing economy has exploded in the recent years, with Uber and Airbnb just being 2 larger examples of that. And then there's a number of meta capital frameworks that have occurred, and we'll take a look at some of those. But just to mention a few partners and inspirations for ourselves, there's the Thrivability Foundation with Robin Lincoln Wood, and also Paul Van Schaik is working with them. Paul's been a long time integral proponent, working with Gail Hachachka in international development and community building. So they've developed a 7 capital model that they're using based on integral theory. I should also mention Reporting 3.0 is informed by integral theory. So it's great, and Reinventing Organizations, Frederic Lalux's work is informed by integral theory. So it's really cool to see how more and more of these initiatives actually are drawing on integral theory and similar integrative philosophies and approaches. And then we have Mark McElroy's work with the multi-capital scorecard, which is gaining some great traction in kind of corporate sustainability context. Ben & Jerry's is one of the more notable companies that has adopted that multi-capital scorecard. So there's a lot happening out there, and it's exciting. And we're wanting MetaIntegral and the MetaImpact framework to be contributing to this momentum, and be building on it, learning from it, incorporating the learnings and insights from all of these efforts, because it's really going to take all of us to make the differences that we need to make. So the first kind of big topic, now that we've gone over kind of the set of the stage and talked a little bit about some of the kind of current cultural trends, is actually looking at some of the multi-capital models that are out there. So as I was doing organizational consulting with MetaIntegral, and we started looking at different kind of multi-capital frameworks. And so I got very interested in kind of tracking down what are the different models out there, and found about, over 24, so around 24. And I've taken kind of a selection of those to show you, what they look like, kind of moving from 3 capital models to 4 capital, all the way up to, as you'll see, 19 capitals. And then it was after studying all of these different models that I started to build the MetaImpact framework. But let's take a look at what some of these different models are, so we can kind of get an appreciation for this trend that more and more people and organizations are looking for models that include more than just financial capital. So it's good to start, before we look at the actual models, kind of what's the definition of capital. And I'm just taking a page, literally, out of the Oxford American Dictionary. Capital can be defined as wealth in the form of money or other assets, or a valuable resource of a particular kind. So in other words, capital is value, like what's valuable. And we generally think of it in terms of money or tangible assets. But as you'll see, there's a movement to expand our understanding of value beyond just financial value and tangible assets, to other kinds of assets, other kinds of valuable resources. If we look at the International Integrated Reporting Council and what they have to say about capital, so I think it's helpful to see, because they've developed a 6 capital framework. So to see how they've defined capital in such a way that it can cover the 6 capitals they work with. So they say the capitals represent stores of value that can be built up, transformed, or run down over time in the production of goods or services. Their availability, quality, and affordability can affect the long-term viability of an organization's business model, and therefore its ability to create value over time. And they go on to say the capitals must therefore be maintained if they are to continue to help organizations create value in the future, and any store of value that an organization can use in the production of goods and services is considered capital. So this is a very useful, solid definition. I think there's some challenges and limits to it. It's still maybe a bit tied to kind of the old paradigm, and I won't get into kind of all of that right now. But I think there's ways in which we can build on and improve this definition of capital, though I feel it's a great step in the right direction. So it gives us something to work with that does interface with kind of more typical notions of capital, and helps open up the conversation to start to include social capital and natural capital and human capital. But I think when we start to create an integral approach, as you'll see, I think it starts to call into question some of the assumptions that are built into the definition here. So here's 2 3 capital models. We have Pierre Bourdieu's model from 1986. So this is probably the earliest example of a multi-capital model. And then we have Pretry's more recently, 2016. So here with Bourdieu, we see economic, social, and cultural capital. And then he splits cultural capital into embodied, objectified, and institutionalized. But anyway, so social and cultural in many cases are very similar. Bourdieu was an anthropologist, among other things. So it's not surprising he would kind of zoom in on cultural and social aspects, but he's also including economic. Then over here with Petrie's, we have human capital, social and environmental capital, and economic capital. These are probably the three most common forms of capital in models that only have three, because generally you always have to include economic capital as a starting point, then social and environmental capital and human capital. Most people have heard of those types of capital, and so more and more models are including those three. When we go to 4 capital models, we have this one on the left from 2011, the social or human capital, financial capital, natural capital, and manufactured capital. The manufactured capital is capital of assets, property, inventory, machines, anything you own, products you produced. So human capital, financial, natural, and manufactured. So again, for 4 types of capital, those are pretty common. Most people have heard of those, so they maybe aren't as familiar with the word manufactured capital, but the idea behind it generally is familiar. And then with Luthans and all, this is a very popular model that includes psychological capital. So this is one of the first times we see psychological capital listed. So we have traditional economic capital, human capital, social capital. So we've seen those in some of the other models we've just looked at. And now we have psychological capital. And I like the summaries they have here. Economic capital is what you have. Human capital is what you know. Social capital is who you know. And psychological capital is who you are, right? In terms of confidence, hope, optimism, resilience. And these 4 words are kind of key words in the psychological capital literature, and they're very much related to positive psychology as well. So 2 examples of 5 capital models. So one from 2014, human capital, social capital, physical capital, natural capital, and financial capital. So here you can see that all 5 are just kind of related to each other just by being placed around this geometric form. There's no real clear indication of kind of any relationship other than just kind of being evenly spaced around an image. Whereas here with this one from Porit in 2009, you start to see 4 types of capital: human, social, financial, and manufactured, that are then encompassed by natural capital. So this is a different kind of relationship than what's being proposed here. So somehow natural capital is a container that includes these other 4 types of capital. We go back and look at the other ones. Here you can just see this is a sequential relationship. This isn't clear if it's a sequential relationship or if it's just a kind of an aggregate approach. Here is just a overlapping relationship, and same here, just kind of an aggregate relationship. So now if we look at the 6 capital models, we have David Martin's model of well-being, commodity, customs and culture, knowledge, money, and technology. So he's using different words than what's more commonly used in other models, but essentially overlaps pretty directly. There's commodity would be, and technology would probably both be manufactured capital in many respects. Well-being could be health capital or psychological capital. Money is financial capital. Knowledge is knowledge or intellectual capital. Customs and culture would be social or cultural capital. Right? But it's always nice to see different models using different terms, just because it gives us more semantic richness and helps us stay creative, and helps us avoid just trying to force fit different models into each other. We look over on our right here at the IIRC's model, the International Integrated Reporting Council's model, which is probably one of the most well-known models. It's a 6 capital model. You have financial capital, manufactured capital in the center, and then around that, in this kind of concentric circle, you have human, social, and intellectual capital. Intellectual capital and knowledge capital are essentially the same. They just chose to use intellectual as a word. And then encompassing all of that is natural capital. So they're positing certain relationships between these 6 capitals. It's still what I would consider largely an aggregate model, as opposed to an integrative model. So it's more kind of like a heap that it's kind of putting these things, kind of on the table, saying, hey, these are all important, we need to include them. And they're starting to identify some of the ontological or epistemological relationships between these different types of capital, though they're still privileging financial and manufactured capital in a sense, in terms of its placement. And that makes sense to some extent. All right, so let's take a look at 7 capital models. So we have this one from 2011, 7 forms, and then they group them into social and physical, cultural, human knowledge, institutional, financial, man-made or manufactured capital, and natural endowments. And then another really well-known one is the Flora and Flora community model of capital. This one comes from 2008. So they have financial, political. So this is one of the first times we see political capital listed: social, human, cultural, natural, and built. Built capital would be man-made or manufactured capital. And they have done a lot of writing, so there's a lot of literature on their approach, and it's more within an academic context and kind of community-based and driven, but it's one of the great resources out there for people who are interested in a multi-capital framework. So I would definitely check out what they're doing. So then we get to 8 capital models. We have this one from 2014, individual, intellectual, social, cultural, natural, built, political, and financial. So again, we see political here as well as cultural and social. Then over here with Roland's work, 2011, 8 forms of capital, intellectual, spiritual. So this is one of the first times we've seen spiritual listed. Social, material, in many cases would be manufactured. Financial, living capital would be like natural capital, environmental capital. Cultural, experiential would be like psychological capital, or spiritual. Well, they have spiritual capital there. So it's interesting to see how, when people add in another capital, right, when they move from a 4 to a 5 capital model or a 6 to a 7 capital model, to see which ones do they include, like as they kind of get a more differentiated map of the key aspects of reality that they are wanting to include in their model. So then we go from 8 capitals to Elizabeth Castillo's work with 19 capitals. It's like, oh my gosh, that's like, seriously? But she does break them into 2 large groups of tangible and intangible. And then within that, there's 6 categories: financial, physical, human, relational, symbolic, and structural, right? And then within those categories, she breaks it out even further, as you can see. So her work's amazing because it just really expands the map a lot, and she's done a lot of work to kind of bring it all together and start to see what are some of the repeating patterns. All right. So that gives you a sense of kind of the ranges of capital models. And I think this quote from Victor Hugo is really appropriate. It's like, nothing is as powerful as an idea whose time has come. And, given how many different multi-capital models are out there and the other trends that I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, it feels like the notion of an expanded model of value and capital is upon us. And we have many examples to draw upon and be inspired by. And now we just kind of have to pick a few of them that feel like they work well and kind of go for it. So I started looking at, what are the meta patterns across the models? And, so of all the ones we just looked at, 13 of them include economic and financial. Basically, all of them include that. Then 11 of them include physical or built or manufactured. Then tying for 3rd place, we have human, social relationships, environmental, and natural, kind of a close 3rd. And then it drops down, right? So these first five, 10, 11, and 13, those occur in most of the models. And then there's kind of this gap where then, we have intellectual knowledge at 6 and cultural at 6 and psychological at 5. So that's kind of like the next cluster. And then it kind of drops down to 3 mention political, 2 mention health, well-being, institutional, and spiritual. So some key questions that I kind of asked myself as I was working with all this is, and so I'm posing to you, is, what strikes you about the various models and multiple forms of capital? So having gone through, those different models, like kind of what's standing out to you in terms of, the way they're organized, the different types of capital they include, kind of how they're arranging, the relationship between those capitals. So I think it's useful to reflect on kind of like, what patterns are standing out for you. And then, what forms of capital would you want to include in your own version of an expanded capital model? So of those, kind of 12 different types of capital that are listed in those models, like which ones do you think are most important, would you include? And then how do we shift from an aggregate approach to an integrative approach? And by that, I mean, moving from a mode where we realize, oh, these are all important forms of capital, we need to include them, so let's put them on the table. Here's natural capital, here's social capital, here's knowledge capital, here's human capital. So it's a good step to kind of get them on the table and get them in the model and say, hey, we need to include these are important. But then how do we understand the relationship between these types of capital, these types of value, and move from just kind of a heap of types of capital to an actual integrated view of the relationships between these types of capital? And this is something that I attempt to kind of deal with in the MetaImpact framework. Speaking of which, let's take a look and kind of see what is involved with the MetaImpact framework. What are some of the key distinctions that we use in this model? So a few of the design questions that I worked with to support me in the creation of this model were, what are the most important types of capital? I wanted, on the one hand, to have as many as were necessary, but at the same time, wanted to have as few as possible, right? So what was the fewest number of capitals that I could have in my model and still be able to cover the bases of reality and of humanity? And I ended up landing on 10, though, it could be 8, it could be 12. When you get beyond more than 10, it starts to become too many. I think more than 12 would definitely be too many. But at any rate, so 10 is kind of a nice number for the time being, but it could change. And then, what is their relationship and how can they be included in an integrated fashion? So I was just talking about that. So I really wanted a model that was much more explicitly integrative in its design than all of those previous models we looked at, which by and large are what I would call aggregate models. And then how to measure them, how to measure these forms of capital, make them visible. And so there's this shift from objectivity to visibility. And with that shift comes the inclusion of first person, second person, and third person metrics, both informal and formal metrics. So part of what the MetaImpact framework does is try and really expand how we might make visible and track these different types of value, and do it in a way informed by mixed methods, by qualitative and quantitative methodologies, but is not restricted to kind of a academic or explicitly scientific modality of measurement and visibility. Because I think we can get a lot more traction by including that, but not being restricted to that. So this idea of tracking currencies and making visible flows of energy or value is an important guiding principle. So one thing that I like to say a lot is a powerful way to change reality is to actually change how and what we measure, right? And so this is what I was just speaking to, that by including first, second, and third person types of data and forms of measurement, that helps us make visible psychological realities, cultural realities, relational realities, somatic realities, environmental realities, human skills and capacities, So most approaches to measurement are almost explicitly and exclusively third person, right? Objective and inner objective in their style and orientation. We embrace all of that, we include all of that, but in addition to that, we bring forward first and second person forms of measurement because, those are important parts of reality. If we leave out our own subjective experiences and dimensions, if we leave out our relational and intersubjective and social cultural aspects, arguably we're leaving out the most important parts. So often when I do organizational work, they have the right systems, they have the right, third person realities in place, but it's first and second person dynamics and emotional and political and territorial dynamics, team dynamics where the breakdowns occur. And so if we don't have powerful ways of measuring and tracking and making visible emotional realities and team dynamics, then we're just going to be hard pressed to make the changes and pivots we need to be making, because things are only getting more complex and the urgency is only increasing. So one of the first distinctions we have in the MetaImpact framework is this idea of 4 types of impact. As the social impact space exploded over the last 10 years, and there was all this talk of impact, I jumped on the bandwagon because I want to see integral approaches having more impact. And so that's why our tagline for Meta Integral is Be Impact, right? How can we individually embody and be impact in how we show up in the world and the actions we take in the world? But I found the discussion of impact wanting, right? It was like impact was being used as this kind of broad bucket to contain a lot. And I realized that a lot of approaches to social impact were highlighting what I would now call clear and high impact, right? So impact, you can see the transformation of behaviors, and high impact in terms of impact within systems and high leverage points to change entire organizational systems or political systems, economic systems, environmental systems. But they often were leaving out the deep impact and the wide impact, or they were giving lip service to these 2 types of impact, but didn't have really good ways of measuring it and including it. So deep impact is the transformation of hearts and minds, and wide impact is the transformation of relationships. So I found it's really helpful to distinguish between these 4 types of impact, because some approaches are really good at deep impact and not so good at clear impact, or they're wanting to have wide impact, but they're set up to really measure high impact. So by kind of teasing this apart and giving ourselves more expressive capacity when it comes to impact and the kinds of impact we're having, then it allows us to start to, talk about how do we measure impact in a whole different way. Also what I see is a lot of for-profits kind of focus on clear and high impact, and nonprofits are really wanting to have deep and wide impact, but they're being asked now more and more to have measurements that are more connected to clear and high impact. And conscious capitalism and conscious business are generally good at clear and high impact, but now they're trying to have more mission-driven impact. And so they're looking for ways they can include measurements of deep and wide impact in what they're doing, because the mission-driven part is generally associated with deep and wide impact. So it's interesting to see that as kind of a general macro trend. Nonprofits, are committed to deep and wide impact and are having to learn how to measure and track the clear and high impact they're having for their donors and their stakeholders. And for-profits are generally good at clear and high impact measurement, but as they become more mission-driven, they're having to figure out how to measure the deep and wide impact that's connected to their missions. So just to give you a sense of how each of these types of impact are measured, with clear impact, you have skill assessments, different types of analytics, observation tools, and various KPIs. High impact, you have environmental impact assessments, financial impact assessments, impact indicators, and also various KPIs. So depending on the KPI, it can be more focused on individuals, or it can be more of a systems, organizational kind of KPI. Whereas with deep impact, we have self-evaluation, psychometrics, so like personality assessments like Myers-Briggs or sense completion test, the LDMA, different factor 5, personality analysis, Enneagram. So all those psychometrics kind of tracking the structures of awareness. We have satisfaction surveys, happiness inventories. With wide impact, we have 360 assessments, relationship mapping, interviews or focus groups, social impact assessments. So these are just a few. We're going to get into a lot more later on, but this is just to kind of help you get a sense of the types of metrics that are associated with these different forms of impact. And so how do we measure those kinds of impact? Well, there's different types of capital associated with them. So with clear impact, we have health capital and human capital. With high impact, we have manufactured, financial, and natural capital. For wide impact, we have social and cultural capital. And with deep impact, we have knowledge, psychological, and spiritual capital. You'll see a little asterisk after some of these forms of capital. If it has an asterisk, which these 4 do and these 2 do, those are the forms of capital that are included in the IIRC's approach. So those are the 6 types of capital that the International Integrated Reporting Council includes in what they're doing. And so I'm just highlighting those because that's a real important kind of body of work that we're wanting to build on. Now, each of these 10 forms of capital have a body of literature behind them. There are books and articles, and in some cases even, training programs, educational programs, built around these types of capital. So these are existent forms of capital already in the literature, already being embraced and used by organizations. Sometimes they have different words, like knowledge capital, sometimes intellectual capital. You might recall manufactured capital sometimes was referred to as man-made or built, or so people sometimes will collapse social and cultural and use them interchangeably. There are some important distinctions that we use here, which I'll get into. But basically, these 10 types of capital are already forms of capital that are established. Even spiritual has like 4 or 5 books and a lot of articles on it. You can also refer to spiritual capital as existential capital. And then you'll notice there's people, profit, planet, and purpose. So these are the 4 bottom lines. And we'll get into those more in a little bit, but one thing to notice here is, generally the triple bottom line of people, profit, and planet are generally defined in terms of high impact metrics and operationalized from kind of a high impact vantage point. I see some challenges and limitations to that framing. I understand historically why the triple bottom line has kind of, taking that approach, but I think we can do better. I think we can expand it, redefine the terms to some extent, where we have profit connected to these 5 capitals, we have people connected to these 5 capitals, we have planet connected to these 5 capitals, and then we bring in purpose. Now, it's interesting to note that generally when you have someone move from a triple bottom line to a quadruple bottom line, like 70 to 80% of the time, the 4th bottom line that's added is purpose. And my understanding of that, or my assessment of that, is because planet, profit, and people are generally defined in a systemic way and an exclusively third-person exterior way. And so purpose, when it's brought in as the 4th bottom line, is an attempt to try and bring in the interiors, to try and bring in meaning and purpose, psychology, emotion, spirituality, social cultural meaning, right? So they're trying to kind of balance out the other 3 bottom lines that are third person and systemic. And so they're trying to kind of, balance it. Here, purpose refers to the value associated with these 5 types of capital. So you see this nice relationship where the people bottom line includes deep impact and clear impact, and these 5 capitals, right? So you have a nice set of relationships between the capitals, the impact, and the bottom line, and how they combine in different ways to give us a dashboard and kind of a report on, the status of things. You also notice the first, second, and third person, 1P, 2P, 3P here. So this is referring to subjective metrics, intersubjective metrics, and objective or even interobjective metrics. Right? So usually when we think of assessment and metrics, we think exclusively in terms of third person, which for us only includes this outer band. We also include the qualitative approaches of first and second person, which are these other 2 bands. Right? So even with financial capital, which is generally thought of in terms of financial reports, and would just be this band, we bring to it an analysis of power dynamics in the intersubjective space, and then also people's personal biographies and emotional dynamics in relationship to money in the first person, right? Just to give one example, right? Let me just go back. All right, so I think that gives you kind of at least a quick orientation to the different layers. So just to summarize them, we have on the outer layer, we have the bottom lines. Then around the color wheel, we have the impacts. And then we have the different pies for the capitals. And then we have the different metrics, first, second, and third person metrics that can be used to measure each of the capitals. And there's also this empty space here, which is where you can put the unit of analysis, the individual or the project that you're wanting to focus on in your meta-impact assessment. All right, so here are the bottom lines, and they're just kind of presented so you're not having to tilt your head one way or the other to kind of see it on the model that was just on the other slide. But here you can see the people bottom line has these 5 capitals, the planet has these 5, and so forth. One thing to notice is the overlap. So these 3 yellow or orange capitals, manufacturing, financial, natural, make up profit bottom line, and they also make up the planet bottom line. The planet bottom line is also made up of the blue pies, the cultural and social, but so is purpose. So this is done intentionally because I'm trying to weave together and overlap the bottom line so that they're related. So planet includes, all the system capitals, the exterior system capitals and the interior system capitals. Profit includes just the exterior capitals. Purpose includes just the interior capitals. And then people includes, the interior individual and the exterior individual capitals, right? So this makes for a really nice kind of analysis because it highlights the overlap and interpenetration of these types of value and capital with the different bottom lines. So instead of having the bottom lines try and be these separate boxes that only certain things go in, we're creating a system where they overlap in important ways. Right. So here are kind of 10 general domains of society that actually kind of map onto the 10 capitals. So healthcare and medicine, leadership and development, science and technology, business and economics, ecology and sustainability, society and culture, art and media, education and learning, brain and mind, religion and ethics. So this is just to highlight that the 10 capitals basically cover all the important kind of domains of humanity. There's nothing really left out with the 10 capitals. I mean, we could further differentiate them, if we need to, but they do a really good job of covering the bases really well. And then these are also the little icons that we use for those capitals. Yeah, here you go. You can see the icons are put in there. So in summary, the MetaImpact framework is 4 types of impact, plus 10 types of capital, plus 4 bottom lines. And the combination of that we call wisdom economy. And we could also add to the 10 types of capital 3 types of data, right? But I think that would be adding too much. In fact, it wouldn't look good on the line there because it would be too many things. But anyways, the main distinctions of the model are the types of impact, the types of capital, and the types of bottom line. So the metrics and mission gap. So how does an organization know it's having unique mission-driven impact? The social impact organizations such as for-benefit companies, impact investment firms, and nonprofits are having more positive impact in the world than ever before, and yet there's often a growing gap between the actual impact these organizations can and are having and how they measure their impact. The current approaches to measuring impact often leads to organizations measuring things they don't always align with the real value they are creating. Imagine an approach to impact assessment that matches, deepens, and expands their mission and produces more of the results their leadership team, funders, donors, investors, and community are looking for. So we feel the MetaImpact framework actually addresses this metrics mission gap, right? And the organizations that we've been working with can attest to that. There's also this idea of having more of the right kinds of impact. Right? So it's not just about having more impact, you want to have the right kind of impact. So it isn't enough to just measure impact or even have more impact, rather you want to make sure you're having more of the right kinds of impact. Right? So, are you wanting to have more deep impact, but you're set up to only measure high impact? Well, then there's that kind of mission metrics gap we were just talking about. So the MetaImpact framework enables organizations to close the gap between its mission and its impact in the world, expand what gets measured using established metrics, first, second, third person data, which is a shift from a focus on what's objective to what's visible. And then include and understand the 4 critical relationships between behavior, systems, relationship, and mindsets, measure what's most important to the organization, and achieve the 4 types of impact. Because often, if you want to have high impact, you often need to have wide impact and clear impact, or some deep impact, right? If you want to have deep impact and transform hearts and minds, you generally have to have some clear impact and some wide impact and a little bit of high impact as well, right? So the types of impact are related. Right. Let's go ahead. Right. So track an organization's unique impact across 10 distinct areas of value creation. So the MetaImpact framework uses up to 10 distinct forms of capital to organize established metrics and assessments in order to measure an organization's unique impact. This allows them to tailor their impact assessments uniquely to their organization's initiatives. The 10 capitals enables an organization to measure and make visible both tangible and intangible results in powerful ways, get quadruple bottom line impact, people, profit, planet, and purpose, tell better stories about the unique impact they are having and how they are touching lives and transforming the world. So this is one of the big things that happens when we work with organizations, is that they realize that they're actually generating a lot more value than they were recognizing. And they start to be able to tell more powerful stories of how they're serving their customers and their stakeholders. And it's amazing just to see that when you have this framework, it allows you to tell a story about the impact you're having in a way that's much more powerful and actually really captures the true value that you're delivering your stakeholders. And it often surprises me to what extent organizations are kind of falling short of their ability to be aware of the impact they're having and then tell stories about the impact they're having so that they can then have more impact as a result of making that visible. So in summary, wisdom economy, can be impacted by using multiple capitals up to 10. You don't have to use all 10. You can use 3, you can use 5, right? And to have more impact, all 4 kinds of impact to create a wisdom economy, right? A wisdom economy is an economy that tends to all 4 bottom lines in the ways that we've talked about today. So a few more kind of key questions. What do you like and dislike about the MetaImpact model I've developed? Right. This is a work in progress. The point primarily is not to just adopt it as it is and use it, though there's value in that. It's more to support your own multidimensional integrative thinking around how can you take ideas and insights from this type of approach and put them to work to support your own initiatives, your own impact. So wanting to really support kind of a critical, engaged dialogue around these ideas. And there's stuff that we haven't yet fully integrated or included in what we're doing. So that we need to be in dialogue with others, such as the Reporting 3.0 folks, who are really helping us see the importance of highlighting the context and thresholds of capacities for different capitals and when and where we can include that. So we're really wanting all of you to engage us around what's working and not working with the MetaImpact framework so we can keep iterating it, testing and pivot. Then how would you characterize the relationship between impact, forms of capital, and the bottom lines? I feel this is one of the exciting aspects of the model because it starts to create a conversation around the relationship between these categories. I don't feel that conversation has been as fully engaged as it should be. I think some interesting things start to emerge when we understand the relationship between the bottom lines, the capitals, and the types of impact, epistemologically speaking, ontologically speaking, and also methodologically speaking. All right. So now we're going to do kind of a quick tour of the 10 capitals, just to give you more detail as to what we're actually talking about there. So here's the model again, just highlighting the 10 types of capital that we have. And we're going to start with knowledge capital, and just go through the 10. So the definition, the working definition, is the amount of information, knowledge, understanding, and wisdom found in individuals. The meta currency is understanding. And there's a lot of microcurrencies, Creative Commons, intellectual property, training materials, articles and books, mental models, frameworks, protocols, methodologies, techniques, licenses, copyrights, and patents, right? So there are different types of currencies that this value travels in. There's different practices to grow this value or this capital. You can do it through education, through training, studying research, through mentoring, action learning, applying for patents, and then getting them, design labs, and so on. Different types of metrics and assessments, just counting up the number of patents you have, the amount of published material, the texts and exams and certifications, the marks that you've gotten, innovation, investment in R&D, attendance hours, different diagrams and charts. So a lot more could be added, to these different, lists. This is just to give you a sense of kind of what do we have in mind when we're talking about knowledge capital. So psychological capital, the definition is the capacity of individuals to think, reflect, and have access to internal psychological resources. The meta currency is psychological well-being. The microcurrencies are self-awareness, EQ, resiliency, hope, confidence. Practices that grow this capital include journaling, reflection, self-inquiry, therapy and coaching, learning new mental models. And then the metrics and assessments connected to it are psychometrics, interviews, questionnaires, surveys, self-reports. Right. So some of these are third person, some are second person, some are first person, right? So in the list of metrics and assessments, I haven't yet kind of pulled out which are first, second, and third person metrics. So they're kind of a mix of those. So spiritual capital, the capacity of individuals to seek, find, and access sources of ultimate meaning, right? So kind of the meta currency is purpose, right? Which is also one of our bottom lines. So that overlaps a little bit. Microcurrencies include presence, mindfulness, concentration, even include something like karma, growth practices, different types of meditations and solo time, prayer, chanting, service work, metrics and assessments, self-narrative, benchmarks associated with various paths and traditions, positive life meaning, mentor and peer evaluations, So now we move over to the clear impact capital, so health capital, which is defined here as the total expression of physical health and wellness for an individual. The metacurrency is physical well-being, so whereas psychological capital was psychological well-being, this is physical well-being. Metacurrencies, or rather not, microcurrencies are blood pressure, BMI, cholesterol, sleep, how many hours getting exercise, energy levels, growth practices, exercise, standing desks, diet, adequate sleep, and I'm a big fan of naps. Metrics and assessments, number of sick days taken, productivity indicators, various health markers, KPIs, analytics, observation tools, right? So kind of, doctor report would also go there. Then human capital, which is one of the more well-known forms of capital. The definition is the total experience or know-how and capacity to perform specific skill sets in individuals. So this overlaps, a little bit with knowledge capital. Knowledge capital is more kind of what's in your brain. Human capital is kind of your ability to take what's in your brain and act from it and actually, perform skills and capacities based on that knowledge. So you can have knowledge capital but not be able to actionize it. And, there's also some other important differences, but the point is that, some of these capitals overlap in different ways, and that's fine. We're not needing them to be hermeneutically sealed from each other. They're just kind of different entry points and windows into value and different aspects of a person or an organization. So the metacurrency for human capital is skills and capacity. The microcurrencies are specific skill sets, technical knowledge, talent, competencies, tacit and implicit knowledge. Practices that grow human capital are trainings, cross-train shadowing courses, sharing knowledge, talent development. The metrics, KPIs, skill assessments, performance reviews, observation tools, turnover rates, equal opportunity reviews. Right? So observation tools were also on human capital, or rather health capital, right? So sometimes the same metric can be used for more than one type of capital. Now we drop down to the high impact capitals. So manufacturer capital is the total amount of assets and infrastructure of an organization. So the metacurrency are the assets or the durable goods. Microcurrencies are equipment, property, building, tools, supplies, inventory, and infrastructure. So essentially things you own. Growth practices are production, R&D, maintenance. Metrics, industrial preparedness measures, depreciation rates, use, analysis, risk assessments, supply chain evaluation, inventory reports. Financial capital, any economic resource measured in terms of money used to make products and services. So the metacurrency, not surprisingly, is money. The microcurrencies are debt, equity, cash, savings, grants. Growth practices, investment, acquisition, sale of goods and services. Metrics or ROI, accounting reports, P&L statements, KPIs, financial impact statements. And then our last one in high impact is natural capital, which is the stocks of natural resources or environmental assets that provide a flow of useful goods or services now and in the future. This still has a bit of an extractive kind of orientation to it. So we have to figure out a way of coming up with a slightly better definition. But this is kind of a typical or common definition that's used. Metacurrency is natural resources. Microcurrencies are clean air, clean water, soil, biodiversity, scenery, recreation, ecosystem services, sinks, like a carbon sink on natural cycles. Growth practices, recycling and reuse, environmental audits, outdoor activities, environmental education, and laws and regulations. Conservation practices, waste management. Metrics and assessments, environmental impact assessments, ecological footprint analyses, carbon emissions, multi-use analysis, waste reports. Okay. So then we come to our final two types of capital in the wide impact area. So the definition of cultural capital is the internal and external processes of shared meaning making of a community. So the meta currency is community coherence, like how well is the meaning making cohering within that community. Micro currencies include language, arts, ethnic diversity, worldview, shared values, traditions, language. Oh, language there's twice. Heritage, growth practices, interreligious dialogue, festivals, art shows and exhibits, ritual and storytelling, community activities. Metrics and assessments include interviews, ethnographic analysis, surveys, historical analysis. And lastly, social capital. The range and variety of social connections with others is the definition. The meta currency is valued relationships. Trust could be possibly listed there. Microcurrencies, where trust is here. Influence, connections, networks, reach, brand, group membership, shared action, reputation. And then growth practices are sharing with and helping others, being honest and reliable, connecting with others, collaboration. Metrics and assessments include 360 reviews, social impact assessments, relationship mapping, interviews, network analysis, brand evaluation, climate of consent, license to operate, norms of processing. Woo! That was quite a quick tour. There's the rainbow wheel without any text, just so we can appreciate the beauty of that and all those forms of capital. So I mentioned it, but it's worth underscoring. You don't need to include all 10. It's recommended to choose at least one from each form of impact. So you're at least covering the 4 types of impact. So in that sense, 4 would be the ideal minimum. And then you can expand from there. Knowing what you are not including is as important as including as much as you can. So it's not as important to just try and include it all, because that you want to do it at a rate where you can actually integrate and build the metric systems for tracking the data and so forth. So better to start small and then slowly expand. So I often recommend organizations that you identify what forms of capital you're already largely engaged with, and that's usually anywhere from 3 to 4, sometimes 5. And then you just get better at seeing how those forms of capital are showing up in what you're doing. And then each year you try and kind of explicitly bring in 1 or 2 more forms of capital, so that over a 3 to 4 year period, then you would kind of expand to a 10 capital approach. Just to give a quick example of an IBM program in Brazil that MetaIntegral designed and delivered with training kind of their young incoming leaders. We provided knowledge capital because we were training them to navigate. And this was like a year and a half program. So it was a long in-house leadership program. So knowledge capital was cultivated by training them to navigate complexity, exposing them to numerous approaches, such as design thinking and vertical development. We cultivated psychological capital through the use of several pre and post measurements of 8 leadership capacities. We cultivated spiritual capital by helping each person get more clear on their individual gifts and purpose and supporting right job placement as a result. Health capital was increased through working with each person to develop an individual development plan that often included things like diet and exercise. Human capital was included by, as trainees, they were getting trained in a number of different tools and techniques that were related to sales and, working at IBM. We didn't really do anything with manufacturer capital, and then also we didn't do anything with natural capital. The financial capital, the program was started to create the next generation of leaders within the company, so it was a long-term investment. Social capital was created by building their connections to each other and with the other cohorts. And cultural capital, we took them on a learning journey to visit an extremely poor neighborhood and learn about the innovation that was occurring there. So with this, year and a half leadership program, we were able to design it in a way that cultivated value across 8 of the 10 capitals. And we did that without having to really try and do anything other than deliver the leadership program we wanted to deliver. So the point is that you can often include, most of the types of capital pretty easily. And you can track and measure them pretty easily, right? You don't have to have a background in research. You don't have to do a lot of fancy analysis to start to work with this framework and have it help you make visible the value that's important to you, and then being able to track your impact. Here's an example of the community capitals that I talked about before. This is the Flora and Flora model, the 7 capitals, right? So they developed a plan for a committee using these 7 capitals. So financial capital, potential committee members, representatives of infrastructure development groups, banks, endowments, and funding agencies. Bill capital, telecommunication systems, utilities, industrial parks, Main Street business locations. Political capital, which for me, that would be more social capital in the MetaImpact framework. Political capital, potential committee members, elected and appointed officials, and those with whom they work, congressional delegations, staff, representatives of political groups. The social capital, in terms of representatives of clubs and organizations, people with links to outside resources, right? Human capital, facilitators, educators, trainers, economic developers, and so forth. See, so what they're doing, they're going through and they're identifying potential committee members who have a lot of each of these types of capital that they could then bring together as part of a community stakeholder team. So cultural capital, potential members would be representatives of cultural and religious groups, museums, historical associations. And then natural capital would be people work for the parks or recreation system, watershed, nature groups, farmers, ranchers, and so forth. Right? So this is an example of the different professionals in the community who hold different roles and who can represent these different types of capital. Here's an example from Gail Hochachka's work in integral monitoring and evaluation. Right, so building skills, which with us is clear impact, the workplace performance and competencies, improving skills, envisioning and planning, and here are the criteria that they're using to assess that, improve communication skills, and then a criteria to assess that, increase number and quality of actors selling to Costco, right? Because this comes out of the work she did around a supply chain in South America related to Costco. And you can read about it. It's posted on her website, Integral Without Borders. So here you just can see there's 3 simple ways of kind of assessing impact, and then the criteria, so they can easily evaluate whether they did this. Influencing systems, so this would be high impact, to decrease the time it takes to bring a product to market. So the criteria is length of time it takes to get the product to market, right? So very simple metrics. Increase number of containers, criteria, number of containers. It might sound redundant, and some of them are, but that's appropriate because it's just highlighting this is what we want to use as the measuring stick, and then this is how we're actually going to measure that. And sometimes there's more variation, but it just highlights how this isn't rocket science. It's very simple. And when you start mapping it out like she does here, I'm not going to go through all of these. You can pause this and read them yourself, or you can go to her work. But I just wanted to go through it a little bit just to give you a quick flavor of how you can start to operationalize the different impacts into specific, kind of criteria and metrics. And then you can even do this by the capitals. You can do it by first, second, and third person, right? You can make it as highly differentiated as you need to or want to. So some questions just to leave you with, what does an approach like this enable? What are some of the barriers that you have or can imagine to a multi-capital framework, like what I've been going through? And then how might we, address those issues? All right, I think that's it. All right, so there you have it. A quick tour of the MetaImpact framework, and hopefully, this will inspire you and encourage you to get involved with us, reach out to us, let us know how you would do it differently, how you're applying these ideas, what you're discovering, and we want to hear from you and be engaged. So thanks for listening for this, and I look forward to connecting with you in some form.